yeah, I wanted to see how it worked, so I took it apart. And good thing about the early personal computers is that they had completely kind of standardized chips. And so you could literally get a book about each chip and read what each pin did and how signals were processed through the chip. And you could design your own circuits and you could modify them and you could literally see exactly how the thing was working. And that was sort of the classroom for me. That was where I learned the basics of how these things work. And then I kind of became fascinated with, well, how could you improve it? How could you make it do more things? How could you expand it? How could you make it go faster? How could you, hook it up to other computers and, sort of let your imagination run wild? The earliest PCs had IBM's name on the outside, but there was no IBM on the inside. And what I saw was that, not only did it take an enormous amount of time for the components to get from the people who made them all the way to the customer, but it was a very inefficient and expensive process. And so I would read about, improvements in technology in Byte magazine, but then, it would take a year or more before you could actually buy it. And so I was kind of a frustrated consumer thinking, hey, where's all this stuff, I keep reading about? And, kind of thought, well, gee, what if you could, sell directly to the end customer and, do it way more efficiently with better service to people who really knew about the product. Now, had no idea this thing called the internet would come along and make it really easy for people to, buy things online and connect. But absolutely felt that over time, more and more people would, be knowledgeable enough to buy on the phone. Interestingly enough, the logical conclusion most people would have after hearing all that is, oh, you were selling to consumers and hobbyists. That actually wasn't much of our business. Most of our business was large companies. And so we were kind of discovered by large companies who wanted computers to make themselves more productive, and public institutions, and that kind of became the origins of the growth of the business. When I was a freshman at the University of Texas, I was going to school and had every intention of going to school, and I was kind of playing around with this as a hobby while I was going to school. And it was sort of a really fun hobby for me because, I was really interested in computers and provided a little extra income. And so, I could buy the latest stereo and kind of whatever I wanted to buy. 18-year-old, 19-year-old kids like to, do stuff like that. When I was a freshman in college, and kind of selling upgrade kits and, enhancing computers. And, my parents kind of got wind of this, and they were really upset because, they thought that I should really only focus on going to college. My father's a doctor, my brother's a doctor, lots of doctors in the family. So I was, going to be a doctor. And so they were, very, very upset with me for, Michael, you got to get your priorities straight, So around Thanksgiving of 1983, my parents kind of made me commit that I wasn't going to, do this computer business anymore. I was only going to focus on my studies. And so that lasted about 10 days. And it was during that time that I decided that I was gonna start a company. And so actually, my parents kind of telling me to stop doing it is probably what caused the company to get created. If they hadn't done that, it might have just been a hobby. But what I kind of reflected on in those 10 days is that I really loved this. And it was enormously exciting, tremendously fun. And so like any other 18-year-old who wants to do what their parents don't want them to do, you just don't tell them. that's what I did. I kind of went about, path to start the company without really telling my parents. I kind of moved into a larger apartment that had really high ceilings, so I could kind of stack things up and managed to conceal it from them for quite some time. And then I basically kind of came to an arrangement with my parents. I said, look, okay, I really want to go do this, and I know you don't want me to go do it, but I've checked with the University of Texas, and the way it works at UT is that you can take a semester off and you can come back. And so I said, well, why don't you, we'll agree to this. I'll take the semester off, the fall of '84 semester, and I'll go and do this. And if it doesn't work out, I'll go back to school. And if it does, I'll just keep doing it. And so they agreed. I mean, if they hadn't agreed, I probably would have done it anyway, to be honest with you. So in May of '84, I incorporated the company, and off we go. They would kind of hear from their friends, oh, Michael's doing so great, his business is going really well. And they're like, what are you talking about? He's supposed to be in college, And so they had a couple of kind of surprise visits. And they would just kind of show up, and like, where are your books? Oh, they're at the library. I'd sort of have good answers, for things. And they kind of couldn't quite figure it all out. But eventually they kind of figured out, wait a second, there's too many computer parts around here. It was a bit hard to disguise what was going on. And so that's when kind of we had this talk. Started with little tiny ads in kind of computer magazines that appealed to business people. And right at the start, about half the business was, people in the Austin area, and half was sort of the rest of the nation. Of course, that didn't last very long. We went all over the nation really fast, and we actually started not making computers, but selling upgrade kits for computers. And this is way back in the beginning of the industry when personal computers didn't even have hard disk drives. And so, we made a business where we would, buy controller chips and cables and write some software and buy hard disks, and we would make kits so you could upgrade your computer to have a hard disk drive. So we were making an enormous number of these kits, like hundreds and thousands of these kits. And we needed computers to format the hard disk drives. So we kind of designed a really basic computer to format the hard drives. And we're busy formatting hard drives. And I remember we had this customer from Martin Marietta who came to see us and he goes, I want to buy 150 of these hard disk drives. We're like, oh my God, we don't have ties. I mean, our office is not really a place you would want to go and see at the time. And so we got to clean the place up. And so I'm showing this guy around, and he's going to buy these disk drives, kits. And he goes, what are those computers you have? Oh, those are the computers to format the hard drives. Well, can we buy those? Good idea. We were so busy formatting these hard drives. We never really thought about that. So about a week later, there was this like Austin Computer Fair in the downtown kind of Coliseum type thing. And by that time, we were sort of the biggest seller of computer stuff in Austin. So we had like the biggest booth right in the center. And so we made this computer in a few days and got a case and sort of brought it to the show. It's like a fully assembled computer. And we brought it to the show, and we just sort of sat it there, and we wrote down the specifications. We said, okay, we'll sell this for $795. We had a lot of interest. And so within about 3 or 4 months, the whole business basically shifted to making these computers, which sounds kind of crazy now. So then we said, well, hey, we've got to go hire engineers, and we've got to go design more computers, and we've got to get more space, and we've got to get bigger factory, and we've got to really go serious about making computers. And that's what we did. Well, in 1986, in the spring of 86, we went to the Comdex trade show, which was at the time like the biggest trade show in the industry. And we had a 12 megahertz 286 computer. And at the time, the fastest computer from IBM was a 6 megahertz 286 computer. So ours was twice as fast. Their computer was $39.95. And ours was $19.95. So ours was twice as fast and cost half as much. We didn't have any problem selling them. I mean, there was an interesting twist though. There were two really long lines of people at our booth. There were all the people who said, I want to run AutoCAD or DBase, and how can I get one of these things really quickly? This is fantastic. And then there were all the press who were kind of wondering, why in the world would anyone ever need a 12 megahertz 286? We already have 6 megahertz and we know 8 megahertz is coming. Those are plenty fast, okay? Compared to today, of course, children's toys have faster microprocessors than the machines we were selling then. I started with $1,000, almost no capital. The interesting thing about the business that we started was that because we were selling directly to the customer would pay us often right at the time we shipped the product. And so, we were able to get credit lines from suppliers, and we had, what's known as a negative cash conversion cycle, which is a very good thing in a business like ours. We still have that today, and it helps us generate significant, positive free cash flow. Essentially, what it means is that when you look at the complete balance of, how fast do our customers pay us, and how fast do we pay our suppliers, and how much inventory do we have, the net of all that is that we actually, collect money, way before, we pay the money out, and so that's a beautiful thing. And in fact, it allows a company to grow very quickly because you have sort of negative working capital. And so we didn't require lots of capital. We weren't as efficient then as we are now, but we were able to grow quite rapidly without a ton of capital. Now we were growing at such enormous rates, we needed some capital because we needed some buildings and we needed some infrastructure. And so we got a little bit of capital. We got a credit line, and we eventually did a private placement, went public in 1988 on NASDAQ, and attracted some capital so we could expand around the world and continue growing. We had all types of customers. It's just that the business customers, the industry really started as a business activity. It was for like accountants and architects and doctors and lawyers and people doing word processing and things like that. There wasn't much personal computing in the home like there is now. We as we grew, we started to sub-segment the opportunities and said, okay, first we kind of said, well, there's large customers and small customers. And then we said, well, it's a little more complicated than that. There are these public sector customers from the government and education and medicine, and they kind of have different requirements and they buy a bit differently, and that's kind of different than large companies. And then we said, well, there's kind of small companies and consumers, and those are sort of different. And there's large companies and global companies. Global companies have a whole different set of requirements than just large national companies, because they want to buy in many countries around the world. And we spent 20 years chasing our customers around the world. Okay, so really big companies like GE and Toyota and Boeing, would say, well, when are you going to be in this country? And so we would we would just kind of every year open a few more countries. I was 22 years old. And seemed like a good idea. We actually had a pretty important meeting about 7 or 8 months earlier, and we kind of went off for a few days with some of the really smart people in the company and a few outside advisors, and we said, well, what are we going to do with this company? I mean, this thing's really growing fast, but we're in a business that's pretty competitive and expanding rapidly. What do we do? So we kind of had 3 strategies that we clued in on as our growth path for the future. First one we said was, you got to go outside the U.S. because 96% of the people in the world live outside the United States, and it's going to be at least half the opportunities outside the United States, and you can't just be a domestic company. Second thing we said was, we really want to go after large companies because they underwrite their purchase of technology through productivity, and they can afford the best tools. And that's, we know, is going to be a lucrative opportunity, and we really want to go after that in a big, big way. Kind of a odd thing for a little company like ours to go after, particularly with IBM and others, in the field. The third thing we said was, differentiating our business is going to be really key, and the way to do that is on service. And you've got to have, better service than the competitors. So we invented this idea of on-site service for the PC, which had really never been done before. And so with those 3 strategies, we kind of marched forward, and that that lasted 5 or 6 years. And the way this would work is let's say you went to Computer Land. There used to be such things in the United States, and around every street corner, and you bought a computer and it didn't work. Well, you'd put it back in the car, and you'd go there and fix this thing, and you'd come back a week or so later, and they'd give it to you. So our idea was that you'd call us on the phone, say, hey, my computer's not working, and we'd come the very next day and fix it. And turns out there were all sorts of third-party companies that had field service networks, companies like Xerox, for example, who had all these technicians all over the country who were kind of waiting for copiers to fail, and so they had this fixed capacity, and so we could buy up that excess capacity at way less cost than we could put it in ourselves, and instantly have way better service. And actually, Xerox is the company we used for quite some time in that. So we used them as one of the third-party, field service providers. So when a customer would call us and say, hey, something's wrong with my computer, the interesting thing is that about 85 or 90% of the time, we could solve that problem actually right on the phone. So we didn't actually have to send the technician, but when we did, we kind of knew exactly what the problem was, and we could very accurately sort of fix it the very next day. And then we've obviously advanced it. Now we have 2-hour service and 4-hour service, for kind of mission critical installations. And some of our customers say, hey, I want to have somebody like there all the time for 24/7, do that too. So it becomes many different types of service offerings. Services is a really important part of our business that continues to evolve, particularly as we create more and more complicated products. Customer isn't so much interested in all the bits and bytes and how fast is the computer and what does it do. They want to know that this installation of a critical system that they're putting inside their business is really going to work well. So they're looking for a solution. And so we have to know a lot about their business, and we have to really be able to, consult with them and tailor a solution that, meets their needs. I think it was, the first couple of years the business grew tremendously, but it was also a business where, you could have gone away at any second, because there were so many things that were fragile and unpredictable, and we were just doing all sorts of new things. By the time we went public in 1988 and had some capital, and it was still a rocket ship, but you could sort of say, okay, it looks like you got something here. I like to take things apart. I was always, taking apart telephones, radios, televisions, sort of anything electronic I could get my hands on. Like to kind of see how it worked, and sometimes I'd put them back together too, but I was mostly interested in understanding how things worked. I grew up in Houston, Texas. My father was a doctor, and my mother was a stockbroker, financial consultant, and have an older brother and a younger brother, so I was the middle child. And when I was in the 7th grade, I was in an advanced math class, and in my math teacher's classroom at the junior high school I went to, they got the first teletype terminal at the school. And this was, of course, before personal computers, and basically you could write a program and send it off to a big mainframe. The answer would come back. And I became kind of, fascinated with this idea of a computing machine. I thought that was pretty cool. And so I would sort of program this teletype terminal, and sort of learned all I could about computers. I was an okay student. In math and science, I was a better student. If I was interested in the subject, I would do a little better, but I wasn't particularly, like a high achieving student. I like to read. I was particularly interested in, science, and, either real science or science fiction. And those kind of things fascinated me. My parents were always talking about the economy, and the stock market and the oil crisis back in the 70s, and I found those things pretty interesting too. So I would kind of read about business, and and started kind of investing and playing around with the stock market, and thought that was pretty interesting too. Well, my mother was a financial consultant. So she was sort of, immersed in the world of stocks and bonds. And, I kind of became interested in, currencies and interest rates, and, what was going on with commodity prices, and kind of an odd thing for a 13-year-old to be doing, but I kind of found it interesting, and would sort of read reports, and started playing around and investing in things, and found that whole idea fascinating. I had a couple of interesting jobs. I didn't actually have any need for income as a child, but I felt compelled to earn an income to allow me to kind of fund my hobbies, right? So when I was 12, I got my first job. I was a dishwasher in a Chinese restaurant, and got promoted to be the water boy, and then I was assistant maitre d'. I was moving up pretty quickly in the Chinese restaurant business, and then I got recruited away to a Mexican restaurant. And I was still pretty young. I was like 12, 13 years old. And then I got a job, kind of interesting job. I was working at at kind of a stamp and coin store. And one of my jobs was to, when people would come and they wanted to sell their, rings or silver, or, I would kind of, assay the metal and calculate kind of what it was really worth, and then try to negotiate with them, to buy it at a good price. I was like 14 years old. So that was a lot of fun. And then When I was 16, I started to be able to drive. Of course, that really expands the number of things you can do, because previously your only method of transportation is sort of like a bicycle or, getting your parents to take you or something like that. So it kind of limited the available job opportunities. So when I was 16, I got this job working for a newspaper in Houston. And my job was to sell subscriptions to the paper on the telephone. And I realized two things when I was doing this. I realized that people that were buying the newspaper generally had two things in common. Either they were moving to a new residence or they were getting married. And it turns out that you could go find information about both of those things in enormous quantities. So in the state that I lived in Texas, when you want to get a marriage license, you have to file with the state, and it's public information, particularly the address that you want the license sent to once it's issued. So I hired all my friends and went to every county in the surrounding 16 counties in Houston, captured the addresses of all the people that applied for marriage licenses, and sent them a direct mail offer to offer them the newspaper for a free trial and then a subscription. And ended up making a fair sum of money for a teenager. I made about $18,000 one year. My government economics teacher was particularly upset with me because we had this assignment in class to fill out our tax return. And so I filled out my tax return and turned it in. She said, "Well, this is obviously wrong." Yeah, I said, "No, this is I filled this, I did the assignment, this is my tax return." And she said, "Well, this can't be right. You made more money than I did." And I said, "Well, that's my tax return." She was kind of upset with me, but I wouldn't necessarily think of myself, purely as a salesperson, but I think it was sort of looking at problems from a different perspective and listening very carefully to what the real problem was and approaching it from just a completely different angle and not being afraid to have a completely new thought, at how to address a problem. It was data driven, and actually, we applied some of those things into the Dell business. One of the other things that I found was that you could actually get lists of people that applied for mortgages, and that was another fantastic source of leads of people who wanted to buy the newspaper. They were moving to a new residence, and you're like, "Oh, I got a new house. Maybe I'm nesting. Okay, the newspaper. That sounds like a good idea." In Dell, we created a business that was, at least from its origin, about directly connecting with the customer. And so it was direct marketing, taken to a whole new level where, whether it was, on the phone or through, the mail or obviously through the internet. We have at Dell right now about 2 billion conversations a year with customers. And those conversations occur in just a myriad of ways, from Dell.com, obviously, to face-to-face meetings, to phone, email, all sorts of conferences, and all of that connection with our customers, informs everything we do in terms of new products, new services, and how we evolve the business. And so this kind of theme of listening has really been important for us. We sort of have a very interesting place in the world in terms of we're kind of in between all these technology ingredients that are evolving at an enormous pace and almost independent of need. They're really based on scientific principles and physical laws and how those can be extended and driven. And so you have all these ingredients like microprocessors and software and memory and hard disk drives and rotating media and optical storage and networking and all these things. And then you have all of these billions of people out there who are trying to get something done, trying to be productive, they're trying to entertain themselves, they're trying to do, they're trying to provide education or medicine or run a small business or run a really big business or a fire department or whatever, hospital, whatever it might be. And so we kind of see our job as how do we, understand all those requirements, take all these ingredients and really make this as simple as possible and allow the technology to be used by the most number of people in the world. My first encounter with a personal computer was kind of, riding my bike home from school. There was a Radio Shack in between my junior high school and my house. And at one time, Radio Shack Tandy was the leading personal computer company in the world, and they had a incredibly kind of simple PC, and so I would kind of hang out at the store and wish that one day I could actually buy one of those. I knew that it was going to be a big deal, but I didn't know how big a deal. Certainly, I think my concept of the macroeconomic impact of productivity enhancement driven by computers, I don't think anybody really captured or understood, all that was about to happen in the next 25 years. But it certainly seemed like a great idea, and it was very fun for me. I was again fascinated by this idea of a machine that could do computations, and being interested in math and sort of seeing how this machine could very rapidly do calculations that I could do them, but I wasn't nearly as fast as the computer. And then the idea of, well, okay, so you've got your brain, which has all sorts of power and capability, and you've got this computer, which has all sorts of power and capability, kind of different though. And how do you combine those to the greatest possible effect? Now, our industry is really still working on that. I mean, if you think about the interface between the computer and the person, it's still evolving tremendously, from simple screens and keyboards to then mice and voice and touch and all sorts of things that are evolving in how the man and the machine relate. There's still a lot to be done there. People that create things, it takes them an enormous amount of time often to leverage the power of computing, through all the way through to their creations. Well, what if we could, shrink that tremendously and automate, a number of tasks that are just repeated. So there's still a lot of progress left in our industry. I was right in the middle of it, and it just seemed like a natural progression. When you step back and think, wow, look at how fast it evolved, and look at how much has changed. It's pretty dramatic, but it all seemed like a logical progression. I mean, we had in our business we had 8 years where we grew 80% per year, and then we had 6 years after that where we grew 60% per year, and the compounded effect of that gets you up to tens of billions of dollars rather quickly. And so we were really busy just meeting the demands and the opportunities that were in front of us. I think you have to be able to experiment and make mistakes. I find the question a bit perplexing in the sense that, if you really don't know, what it means to be an entrepreneur, maybe you aren't one. So I think there's a bit of kind of self-initiative and self-starter, that is incredibly important part of entrepreneurship. I mean, no one can sort of tell you how to do it. You have to sort of have an instinctual, feeling or an idea about something, and you got to be passionate about it. I mean, I think people that look for great ideas to make money, aren't nearly as successful as those who say, okay, what do I really love to do? What am I excited about? What do I know something about? What's kind of interesting and compelling? If you look at our story, at any point in the process, you could have gone to conventional, experts. In fact, I remember, I won't name the person because he's still a extremely well-known author of famous business books, teaches at a very prominent university. I showed up at a conference when the company was 3 or 4 years old, and he was sort of critiquing our business, and he kind of said, "Oh, this will never work," it was a common experience. I mean, when we launched our business in the United Kingdom, we had about 22 journalists show up. And it was sort of funny because it was about 3 or 4 weeks before we launched, we started actually selling. And the thing was just going like crazy. It was just growing so fast, which is a good thing because when we had the launch, about 21 of the 22 journalists said, "Oh, this is a horrible idea. Never work in the UK. It's a completely American idea. And don't even think about coming here. You should just pack your bags and go home." Lucky for me, we'd already started, and so hey guys, love to entertain some more questions, but I got to go back to the office because we're busy taking orders and making computers. We had problems in 1993 that I think were multifaceted. One big challenge is that the company had grown so fast. We had grown from, in 1988, maybe 150 million to, by 1993, almost 2 billion in revenues. And the infrastructure and the systems and processes was not really keeping up. In fact, in 1 year, we grew from less than 900 million to over 2 billion. People say when you hit 1 billion, you like hit the wall. We just, jumped right over it, went right to 2 billion. But it was a real mess. We sort of had to stop, reevaluate things. We had real challenges in, how fast can you build factories and how fast can you hire people and put up, new buildings and, hypergrowth, sounds really fun and exciting. But I learned the hard way there is such a thing as growing too fast, where the wheels sort of come off, and you have to sort of take a time out and say, wait a second here, let's prioritize. And, I was absolutely to blame. I mean, we were going and doing so many things at one time, because we were really excited. I mean, we were like, okay, we're gonna go in this business, we're gonna go in that business, we're gonna go to this country and this new product and this new service, and it was just too much of a good thing. And so we had to really sort of hone it back. The Olympic was a project that we created. We had a really bright technical team, and they came up with a new computer architecture, which was sort of unbelievable in terms of what it would accomplish. And it crossed all sorts of new boundaries for us into the server opportunity, into the workstation opportunity. And it turned out that it was sort of technically too much of a challenge for our team to digest. And even if we could digest it, our customers weren't really ready for it. So, we sort of learned a valuable lesson about it's not just technology for technology's sake, but kind of relevant technology and what really matters to customers and what inventions are really valuable versus just, well, let's go create a whole bunch of new things. We had a notebook computer of ours. Computer batteries, batteries themselves, are basically devices that store energy, and they're supposed to release the energy very, very slowly. And it's a complex, chemistry and device. And if the process in building the batteries is in any way, flawed, the battery can release the energy much more rapidly than it's supposed to. And you don't want to be around when that happens. So we had, some batteries. It is a very small number, like a handful of batteries. And it made, kind of a global news story. And so we sort of went into action, electron microscopes, tearing these things apart, looking at them. We kind of did a complete full investigation and found that one of our suppliers, Sony, had made some batteries that had the possibility of this defect. Quite a small likelihood, but still it was there. And so we made the decision to recall all of those batteries. Now, the interesting thing, if you go back and look at when we made that decision, the popular wisdom was that it was an issue that was unique to Dell. And Dell was the only company in the world that had this problem. It must have been because Dell did something wrong in the way it designed its computers. Several weeks later, another computer company announced a similar recall for the same Sony batteries. And then several weeks after that, another company, and eventually all of the companies that use the Sony batteries announced recalls. We were very proactive in doing it, and I think our teams did a fantastic job in sort of doing the right thing. You could have had all sorts of arguments about, well, it's a really small percentage or those kinds of things, but we actually knew the problem was there, and even though there were debates about, okay, is it going to be 6 batteries that fail or is it going to be 10 batteries that fail? Doesn't really matter. One battery failing is one too many. And my experience is that when you find a problem, you fix it as fast as you find it and just move on. And whatever the consequences are of fixing it, you just deal with it and just keep going. And no one's going to fault you for fixing a problem. Now, if you keep making the same mistake over and over again, then that's not acceptable. But better off to I would always rather be the first one to fix a problem and have others follow us, than to wait and kind of see what other people do. I think Austin has a kind of special place in our hearts because it's where we live and it's our hometown. Our foundation does things all over the world, but we have done quite a few things in Austin. We were very involved in a children's hospital there, and gave a pretty large grant to the University of Texas to build a pediatric research institute, which is sort of a precursor for a medical school, which is a much needed resource in Austin that a number of us are hopeful will come, and also to build a new computer science building, at the University of Texas in Austin, and another facility really focused on pediatric health and addressing childhood obesity and really trying to get kids more active and deal with the preventative aspects of medicine as opposed to the other side. It's a shift left. I mean, in our industry, we're always looking for the root cause. And, if you fix problems at the very end, it is exponentially expensive. It's true in healthcare or any other kind of system. And, the system we have in this country applies enormous expense at the very end and has very little sort of responsibility and measurement and accountability at the beginning. Yeah, the foundation has we've got an office in India. We're getting pretty active in Africa, really focused on disadvantaged urban youth, and there are lots of opportunities all over this country and all over the world, whether it's in education or healthcare, and we've taken a kind of measurement and data-driven approach. I think there are a number of new philanthropists that have come into focusing on using data and analytics in a much more intensive way, and we've kind of adopted a number of the business practices, the way we would think about projects at Dell with return on investment, and our objective is not just to provide a bunch of grants, but really to understand problems and make sure that we get results and that those are sustainable improvements. So we're not just, providing, a support system, but rather we're fundamentally changing the outcomes. And so that after 4 or 5 or 6 years, our goal is that we don't have to do that anymore. We can go do something else because we fixed that problem. And so, those are the kind of challenges that we take on. I would say it's working with incredibly smart people in an industry where it's right at the center of change, and you get to see so many changes are going on in all the industries around the world, and kind of see how countries and societies are evolving, embracing this technology. I'm still getting my education, and I get it every day when I travel around and meet with customers, meet with our teams, and the industry I think is still very much in the early days in terms of how technology affects all parts of society.